Like lots been going on, as we're saying, in the past 7 days. I'll come to you, Jenson, first, if I could, on this before we come to Craig on the wheres and wherefores of it. Ferrari and Sebastian Vettel leaving. Did he walk? Was he pushed? I think that's the great imponderable at the moment.
Well, if he was pushed, for me, it's madness. It really is. You know, a four-time world champion. I think he showed his speed as well last year. You know, he had a tough moment in the season when Charles was performing really well, and I think that did hurt him a little bit mentally. But he came back really strong, and he's just somebody you would definitely choose to put in your car if you had an F1 team. So there must be more to it. I don't know if Ferrari are going down the route of not wanting two number one drivers or what, but it's a really strange choice for me, and I'm still shocked by the decision of Sebastian not being in a red car.
Okay, what about you, Martin, on that front?
Excuse me. I'm hearing everything Jenson says, and I agree with him, but just looking, I mean, we were filming there last year and talking to Seb, listening, picking up the intel. I think they just fell out of love with each other. Sebastian lost confidence that they really could go and take championships in the future. They lost a bit of confidence in him, too much contact, too many silly incidents. And obviously they've now, put all the chips on Charles Leclerc for the future. And again, I don't think they do want two bulls in one field. So they think Carlos Sainz will fit in there perfectly as a number 1.5 driver. Maybe he'll be better than that. I'm a big fan of his, as you know. But it does seem bizarre the whole thing's bizarre. We're talking so much about next year, fundamental changes. Teams are working blind because there's no performance this year from the car or the driver. So they're making big decisions. We've talked now for a year or two on Sky F1 about the changing of the guard in Formula One. Well, the guard has been changed, really, hasn't it, in many respects? The young guys are calling the shots fundamentally. Max sitting down at Red Bull, Charles at Ferrari. Now they're filling in those spaces. And that's what's going on. They've gone for the 25-year-old Carlos Sainz. One podium to his name, but he's got a bit of a winning. He's a sportsman, really, a bit like his old man, I think. And I think he will handle the pressure there very well. They've played a smart hand, him and his dad. The cards have fallen very well for them, I must say. This was a belated podium celebration, of course, back in Brazil at the end of last season. But that was coming his way at some point. And I think he's a good kid, and I think he'll fit the Ferrari mould well. I think Vettel will come out of the blocks absolutely flying in 2020 if we ever get underway. And he's going to listen to exactly no team orders, isn't he?
Yeah, Craig, was there any indication, in the newsroom of this happening? It was one of those there was a little inkling, I suppose, the night before, and then it all just happened, didn't it, in the space of a few hours?
Yeah. To try and answer your original question, did he walk or was he pushed? What I can say is, I'll repeat what I said on this programme a couple of weeks ago. Sebastian Vettel, at that point, had not been made an offer by Ferrari. My understanding was he was never made an offer to stay on by Ferrari. There's been an interview given by Mattia Binotto, the team principal, in the last few days, where he says, we're pleased with our choice in terms of the way forward, in terms of selecting Carlos Sainz, in sharp contrast to what was said by Binotto in winter testing when he said, Seb is our first choice at the moment. Obviously, it is something we're discussing with him and we'll continue discussing, but he is certainly our first option, our preference. But what happened in between then? Of course, the coronavirus crisis. And as Binotto put it this week to our Sky colleagues in Italy, the world has changed during this time, and we have to look at the future of F1 in a different light. Because the cars are going to be staying the same for 2020 and 2021, Ferrari now see it as a longer-term project to get back to the front. So was Vettel, a 4-time world champion, the appropriate person to have at the team, or did it not serve the team better to have a young charger in Charles Leclerc and also an up-and-coming driver like Carlos Sainz as a steady partner for him? It seems that has been the most sensible way to go forward for both parties. But interesting that Ferrari see themselves a long way from the front again now.
If you'd been in Binotto's shoes, Jenson, and it was a straight choice between Daniel Ricciardo and Carlos Sainz, as it seemed to many, do you think that they've made the right choice?
That's a really tricky one to answer. If Binotto has gone for Carlos because he thinks he's a good pair of hands, but won't really give Charles a run for his money, I think he's mistaken, because I think that Carlos is a winner. He's like his father. He wants to go out there and do the best he can, and he wants to bring home a championship. So he's chosen the wrong person if he just wants a good atmosphere within a team. Obviously a great character in Carlos, but he wants to win, as I said. So we'll have to see how it plays out. It's just a really weird time at the moment. We've not seen a Formula One car on track in months, and to make driver choices at a point where drivers haven't been driving is really unusual. Normally it's mid-season. You see how the guy is performing during that year, and then you make your decision. Vettel could have been 4 or 5 wins in at this point in time, and then I'm sure the decision would have been very different.
Yeah, it's the youngest Ferrari driver lineup for 50 years. Does this, and the decision of Vettel, if it was his decision or whatever, does it give us an indication of where Ferrari might be at? As Craig was saying there, this is a rebuilding phase. Are you fairly convinced that might be what's going on at Maranello right now, Martin?
I think obviously their car didn't perform too well in the pre-season testing, so they're still maybe convincing themselves they're in a development phase, a growing phase. Obviously, Ferrari should be right at the front and challenging for every world championship with the resource that they have. So, I think, Carlos, at 25 years old, he'll be 26 before he arrives at Ferrari, is he's got 102 Grand Prix plus whatever else he gets this year. Let's call it 120 until 115 or something. He's a really experienced young driver in that respect. So I don't think they're not wet behind the ears, these kids. And the way that Formula One is now so data driven with the sims and with the sensors on the car, and you don't need, the really old hands at the wheel trying to decide where the car's going, where the team anymore. I think it has become a young man's sport in that respect. Quite clearly at 35, Lewis, Peter Pan, is still king of the castle. To beat him, because Lewis in the Mercedes will be, as we know, pretty damn difficult to beat over a season long. So I think it's a great little lineup they got at Ferrari, and they can manage the lack of age, if you like, or lack of experience. Would I have taken Ricciardo instead of Sainz? I might just have done, but something they've seen with Sainz, maybe at Renault, or not really wanting to face up to Verstappen at Red Bull, something's turned them off about Ricciardo, because obviously his stats and his experience suggest more. Maybe they didn't like the way that Danny Rick and Max tripped over each other, ran into each other. That's the very thing they hated last year in Brazil, when their two cars, one's hard enough without two cars run each other for a double DNF. So maybe they didn't like that aspect. They thought they wouldn't be able to manage Ricciardo in the same way they can manage Sainz. Whatever it is, they're not silly people at Ferrari. They've thought this through, and they've gone for what they wanted. They've worked on it now for at least 3 months to get Sainz, and if Craig's right, they never had any intention of keeping Seb at all.
If you look to Carlos Sainz at potential weak spots in his driving compared to Charles Leclerc, you might argue that Carlos Sainz on a Saturday is not as quick as he could be. However, to counter that, I will say in 2015, when they were at Toro Rosso, he was only 0.06 of a second on average away from Max Verstappen. So there's some evidence that counts it there. But when we talk about Carlos Sainz, we talk about a guy who on a Sunday his racecraft comes alive. If they can keep out of each other's way on a Sunday afternoon, that's a big thing. It has to be, doesn't it, for those at Ferrari, Jenson?
Yeah, and the big thing about in Formula One, it's not just about the driver's speed, because every driver in F1 has pretty good speed. it's the environment they're in. And you look at Carlos when he arrived at McLaren, he's felt that it's a team that's really been around him. It's given him a lot of confidence. You see that in the way that he drives and his consistency, not making mistakes. When you suddenly move to a team like Ferrari, it's very different. There's so much pressure on your shoulders from everyone. You know, they're always team. The drivers obviously are very important there, but there's no individuals at Ferrari. It's a big team sport, and you win for Ferrari. So it'd be interesting to see how the atmosphere does change and how his driving changes in that really tricky situation.
Do you think, Craig, just to finish on this one, touched on the economics and COVID economics and it being a brand new world out there in terms of driver salaries, it must have played a part. You're saying no contract offered to Sebastian Vettel, but Vettel versus Carlos Sainz, he's got to be cheaper, hasn't he?
Yes, he has. And the other two guys, though, will explain better than me that perhaps in a climate where we're looking towards cost caps coming in and driver salaries being out with the cost cap, that is going to be a differentiator that teams are going to be able to exploit. So maybe driver salaries might go up just a little bit. Yes, of course, Carlos Sainz is cheaper than Sebastian Vettel. I suppose if you were to be critical, you'd look back at Seb's time and say it wasn't particularly great value for money, was he, for Ferrari, given the number of mistakes he made over those, particularly the last 3 seasons when they had a half-decent car. And it's interesting, maybe we talk about Sainz a little bit in the terms of being this kind of steady Eddie, but speak to Lewis Hamilton. In terms of winning a championship, consistency is the key. I'm sure Jenson would back that up, and Martin as well. And although Vettel was certainly inconsistent, so was Leclerc, just a little bit too at Ferrari in his debut season. So I think Mr. Consistency Sainz, why shouldn't he be an equally decent bet for a championship should Ferrari get the right car?